Hello there everybody, this is Krista and welcome back to Crochet Witch Tarot. And we're doing an idea today that I just came up with. And we're gonna roll with it. I thought it would be a lot of fun. Something I've been thinking about lately are the decks that I use for different spiritual practices I have, or connecting with different divine beings, really as I define it. So, I wanted to do a video today where I was showing all of my divine energy decks, and I thought it would be really fun to break them up into the categories of the general kind of workings I do. So, we're going to be looking today at 3 different categories. First being spirits. So, again, this is entirely how I define these things, how I fit them into my practice, so keep that in mind. Anyway, we are going to be looking at decks I used for spirit connection. So to me, that's anything from connecting with spirits, ghosts, however you want to see it. I don't do too much of that, but I do some, so we're going to look at those. But I also see spirits as ancestral work, connecting with past loved ones, maybe that I've known, or anyone in my ancestral line, really. I categorize that as spirit work. So we're going to be looking at that. Then we're going to be looking at the decks I use to connect to guides. So I do work with a personal spirit guide, but then there are also other things that I really do look to for that guide energy. Finally, we're going to be looking at the decks I use to connect with personified deity. So, I think we should just get started, and let's start out with the decks I use to connect with spirits. The first and most used of those, especially for that classic kind of spirit work, ghost talking type things, is my Memento Mori Oracle. Now again, when it comes to that classic, what we think of anyway as that classic spirit work, connecting with the ghosties, I don't do too much of that. When I do though, it's always this deck. I just find it really instantly connects me to that realm. I mean, really to me it feels like it was made for that purpose. I don't know that for sure. That's what it feels like to me. And for some reason, just energetically, this deck feels very, oh gosh, how do I want to explain that? Kind of connected to that, like, classic haunting type feeling. Like, when you know there's something kind of lingering around, if I want to connect to that, that's really the energy this deck holds for me. And I think it really has a lot to do with these antique Victorian images and these keywords that really do kind of push you to use your intuition a bit more. At least that's what it does for me. And so that's really how this deck works best, is pulling cards in that way and just sort of using it to guide an intuitive message. So I love using this deck for any sort of spirit communication. I use this across the board, like across these 3 categories, just because I find it connects to any sort of spiritual realm so well for me, but it is really the #1 deck I use for any kind of spirit communication. So that is the Memento Mori Oracle. Now, staying on the Claire Goodchild train, because I do feel like she just, she creates decks that feel very connected to this, like, ghostly realm. We're gonna look at the Antique Anatomy Tarot. Now, what I love about this tarot for this kind of work is really the pip style nature of it. I really like that the images are a bit more pared down. Again, it's got this antique look to it, so I can really easily mentally put myself in that space. But again, I feel like it really lends itself well to more intuitive reading, I suppose you could say. I don't know. I mean, it's just the use of all of these bones, skulls, all of these types of things. I just feel like it really tends to draw that kind of energy for me. Not to mention, it pairs very well, of course, with the Memento Mori, but I do really love using this tarot in that way specifically. And I do really love using it for any type of ancestral reading as well. I find it works very well for me in that way. So that is the Antique Anatomy Tarot. Next we've got another oracle, and that is the one I could not remember the name of last time I showed it. It is the Mildred Payne's Secret Pocket Oracle. Now this is the deluxe one because I wanted the one that was a bit larger in size. But this is another one that really pushes me to use my intuition a bit more. And so I almost use it a little bit in a Lenormand way, just that I'll never pull just one card from this deck. And sometimes I do read it like I would a Lenormand, where it's very literal and you kind of read it across, but it really is just a deck of symbols. So it's almost, and there's no guidebook, so there's really no option but to read it very intuitively. And I find the decks that do that for me really tend to be helpful for any type of spirit connection, because it's almost like it allows me to connect to any messages without anything else kind of getting in the way of that. But also, again, there is that kind of like vintage look to this deck as well that really just seems to lend itself. And I love how this deck especially works with the Memento Mori Oracle. They really just seem to speak to each other really well. This is really cool as a clarifier for that deck. I love using it in that way. This is such a good one. I'm so glad I have this little deck. It is the Mildred Payne's Secret Pocket Oracle. This is put out by Patrick Valenza, Deviant Moon. Excuse my sniffles. Oh my gosh, I just realized I've probably been sniffling this whole time. Alright. So, last deck in the kind of general ghostly area is the Somnia Tarot. And I feel like this one kind of speaks for itself because the figures truly are just so ghostly looking. Now again, this is one that I like using for a lot of different spiritual connection type workings. But I do find that it does, again, really connect especially well in this way. And I think it does have something to do with, first of all, it being these real photographed people, but also that their faces are obscured. We have all of these sort of draping fabrics, things of that sort, which, I mean, really gives off that classic ghost vibe, as, you know, it's showed to us in cartoons and TV shows where they're those white sheeted ghosts. And so I think it's easy for my brain to kind of place these things there because, I mean, when you look at these, to me, I just see ghosts. And my thought about any sort of spirit is that they would be kind of obscured in a way. I don't know, I just feel like they would. And so I really love using this deck in that way as well. But again, any sort of spirit reading or any sort of connection to something in other realms, I love using this deck for. I just think it really has this spiritual energy to it for me that I don't really feel like I have another deck that totally does that. So that is the Somnia Tarot. Now I've got two decks to show that really fit more into that ancestral type reading. And the first is the Future Ancestors Tarot. I feel like probably pretty self-explanatory, but I really do love the whole concept of this. I love the feel of it. It's got this very relaxing nature very calming. And it just gives me the feeling of, if I want to connect to ancestor energy, this is how I want it to feel. Nothing too, what's the word I'm looking for? It feels unobtrusive. It doesn't feel like I'm getting any sort of biased advice. That's what I'll say about this deck, is that using this, it's not connecting to any sort of specific ancestral energy for me. And I mean that in a way of, I'm not connecting to a specific ancestor, someone that maybe I have known or I at least know the name of. So I don't feel like the advice I get is charged with any sort of personal worldly experience. Because sometimes when I do certain ancestral readings, especially connecting with specific ancestors, I do need to be mindful that any advice I'm being given is going to be sort of influenced by that person's experience of living, really. Just like it would be talking to anyone else in my day-to-day, it's going to be biased in that way. But I find this deck really connects to an energy that, I don't know, maybe has been removed enough from an earthly life that they can be a bit more unbiased, which is what I really, really like about this deck. So that is the Future Ancestors Tarot. Now, leaning more into that other energy where I do feel like I can connect to more specific ancestors with it, would be my Carte Postale Tarot. So this is one that really, it has such an interesting personality to me. And I think a lot of that does have to do with, again, a lot of times when I pull cards from here, the answers do feel a little biased, which is not, it's not a bad thing by any means. It's just something to be mindful of, I guess, or that I need to be mindful of how that ancestor's experience might be sort of coloring the advice they're giving. But I just find that this deck really goes directly to what feels like my own personal ancestors that I know the names of, the stories of. It just really connects in that way. I love the vintage feel of it. I mean, that's really what it is this vintage feel. Totally gives it that type of energy. But it almost reminds me of like old British television. Almost. I don't know. And I have nothing to base that on at all. That's just what comes to mind. And I do have a lot of family from England and Germany. So it feels like this deck really does connect to that part of my lineage. Really for no other reason than just the feeling I get. So I love using this deck for that more kind of specific ancestral connection. So that is the Carte Postale Tarot, and that is my last deck in this spirit category. So let's move along to that guide energy. Okay, so now we are moving on to the decks I use to connect with any sort of guide energy. Now for me, personally, this is a spirit guide I work with, as well as I really tend to work a lot with animal energies, as I've talked about. Is there anything else? Oh, and I work a lot with Fae energy. So, the first deck I have to show, of course, has to be my Cottage Witch Oracle. Now, the reason this connects to guide energy so heavily for me, I think really is because it's a deck I built around my own spiritual practice. So all of these images and keywords have a lot of personal meaning to me. And I created them, again, based around that spiritual practice. So in effect, with help from any sort of guides I'm connecting to. So for example, this time association, I put magic because time is something that is really associated with the Fae and fairies, who are very magical to me. So that's where that association comes from. So of course, this deck feels just like it feels very personal and so easily connects me to that kind of guide energy because I know it inside and out. So that is my first guide deck, and that is the Cottage Witch Oracle. Now let's go right on to the next one because it'll be no surprise. I'm sure you're all tired of hearing about this one from me at this point. But it is the Woodland Warden's Oracle. Now, as I said, I spent a lot of time connecting with different animal energies, learning about animal habits, things of that sort, and kind of drawing inspiration from that. And as of right now, this is my hands down favorite animal deck to do that with. And I'll say because, I mean, I really connect with the imagery. We'll start there. I love the animals that are in this deck. They're ones that I can really easily connect with because I know them well. But I do also love that we get an animal and a plant in each card because plant magic, plant energies, herbalism, whatever you want to call it, is something that I, over the past year, I would say, have been working on incorporating more into my spiritual practice. So again, it really just feels like this perfect combination. And so it's really cool to work with animal energies as a guide and have this accompanying plant energy along with it so that I can get to know that a little bit better too. So yeah, this one is just hands down my favorite one right now. I just think it's perfect in every way. So that is the Woodland Warden's Oracle. Next up, we've got the Gaian Tarot. I really enjoy this tarot, and I find that it does connect really well with my personal spirit guide because it's showing us these very everyday people, I would say, but we get them in these moments of almost kind of like mundane magic, and that is something that I really lean in heavily for when it comes to working with my spirit guide, because that is sort of a big thing that I work with that guide for, I guess you could say, is really just seeing the magic in everyday life, building that into my everyday experiences, things of that sort. And so this deck just completely connects to that energy for me. And I find that every time I use it, especially in conjunction with the next deck, that spirit guide is coming through loud and clear. It feels like they just love this deck. And I do too. It really is such a special one that, again, really just feels like it captures that idea of mundane magic, which I just really, really appreciate. I mean, also, come on. And we get everything incorporated into the one. So we have these very everyday people that are easy to relate to. We've got animals and plants and these kind of just natural phenomena. I don't know. It's a great one. So that is the Gaian Tarot. And most often, if I'm using that deck, I'm using it alongside the Celtic Spirit Oracle. Now this is one that just kind of happens to, oh my gosh, I love the card. That is on top right now. Best one by far. Oh my gosh. Amazing. This oracle really just heavily connects to my spiritual practice in general. So it's a really multi-purpose oracle for me. It just feels like it gets right to the heart of the things that I'm thinking and feeling or trying to incorporate into my own life. So again, when it comes to that spirit guide, who to me feels like a very day-to-day kind of guide, helping me through those sort of mundane moments, bringing that magic in, using this oracle that just really gets the overarching theme of all of the things that I do in my different practices. just feels like it connects right to that kind of guide energy. And so this really feels like a deck that, if I had to pick one for spiritual practice in general, it would be this one. Because I love all of the concepts in here, the ideas in here. There's things that I really enjoy to work with in here or enjoy learning about, and I don't know, it is just perfect in that way. My spiritual practice tends to take a pretty Celtic lean, I find. So, of course, the Celtic Spirit Oracle is going to be perfect for that. But again, since that really is such an overarching theme of everything that I do in terms of spiritual practice, having this oracle really helps me connect with that on a day-to-day basis, with that guide I work with on a daily basis, really. So, that is the Celtic Spirit Oracle. Okay. Now, we have one more kind of general spirit guide kind of deck, and that is my Northern Animal Tarot. Now, this is one, I've talked about it so often that right away when I got this one, it felt like I connected to it on such a different level than anything else I've worked with. And that feeling has pretty much remained the same. My amount of time I spend with this deck really does kind of ebb and flow, I'll say, but I do always come back around to it. It's one I know that if I pull cards from it, it's just going to get right to the heart of exactly what I'm needing to know, what I need to hear. It's almost like it feels like it just instantly knows everything I'm thinking without me having to say anything, you know? And so when I started working with this spirit guide, it was sort of this realization that that's what was coming through this deck. That this deck really connected to that kind of guide energy for me, which makes a lot of sense because, I mean, this deck is the perfect combination of so many different things I love, with that fantasy type feel, but then we also get the animals and these nature landscapes, so it really does, it makes a lot of sense. But this is one that I really do like to use to connect to that very familiar guide type energy. Those kind of readings you have where it's like, feels like you're sitting down again with an old friend where you don't have to explain everything. They just know because they know you so well. So that is the Northern Animal Tarot. And my last two decks I have to show are my favorites to use to connect with Fae energy. So this first one will be no shock and surprise. And that is Brian Froud's Fairies Oracle. This first card is one that I have pulled probably the last 3 or 4 times I've pulled from this deck, so obviously I need to pay attention to that. But this is a deck that really just, I mean, I think it's like a universally felt thing for this deck, that it just has that wild fae energy built into it. There's an undeniable energy I feel with this deck where it's almost like it attracts fae energy to it almost. I don't totally know how to explain it except that it feels really energetic. Like when I'm using it, it's almost like I can hear all of these fae voices around me, like, that probably sounds so insane to some people. I promise I'm not hearing things. I just mean that it's such a unique experience I have had with this deck where I have connected with fae energy before this deck. It's something that I have been working with for quite some time, but as soon as I brought this deck into my collection, it just was the first time I felt like I could really feel that energy there in a reading. That it wasn't necessarily even me trying to connect, it just happened. And so this is by far a favorite fairy deck to use to connect with that kind of energy. It just, there's nothing else like it for me. So that is the Brian Froud's Fairy Oracle. And alongside it, if I want to do a tarot reading to go along with the card, I almost always use my Hush Tarot, which is another one that really feels like it connects to that same kind of fae energy, but I also really love that we get, again, that animal energy intertwined. And, I mean, the kittens, come on, right? You gotta love the kittens. So, yeah, there really is just, there's something about this one as well that feels very wild, feels energetic in that kind of way. And actually, now that I'm looking at it, I feel like the art styles, they're not the same, but they have a similar, almost like, oh, this is not the right word, but it's, only thing in my head is like, there's kind of this like dirtiness to it almost, like grittiness, that I really just love. And so this is a tarot that can connect me right to that realm, especially if I'm using it alongside that Fairy's Oracle. I just find that they are such a fantastic pairing. I really, really love using this one to connect with fae. So that is the Hush Tarot. And that was my last guide energy deck. So now we will move on to my final category of divine decks, and that is personified deity. Alright, first up is an oracle that really just feels like it helps me generally connect to some sort of divine energy. If I don't really have anything specific in mind, this is something I really like to use, and that is the Guidance of the Goddess Oracle. Now, a lot of the times when I am connecting to personified deity, I have a specific deity in mind, or there are a handful that I work with regularly, so these next few decks are more going to be about that, but there are occasions where I really like to pull from this oracle and kind of just see who's got something to say. And I really, really enjoy using that in my practice, especially with this goddess energy. I really enjoy connecting with these ideas of personified deity to connect with the concept of the divine feminine. The Great Mother is an idea that I really work a lot with. So that's why I tend to like to use a deck like this that has so many different facets of that idea of the Great Mother or divine feminine, so that I can kind of pull these cards out to connect. So sometimes I will shuffle and pull a card like I usually would with an oracle, but a lot of times I will specifically pull one of these goddesses out to work with their energy. So this is just a really great sort of like catch-all type deck almost. That definitely is not what I'm meaning to say, but I'm hoping you're getting my meaning from using this deck. I just really like having decks that explore different specific personified deity, and I like having that kind of oh my gosh, I'm really forgetting my words today. That kind of variety. That's what I'm looking for. If I'm not necessarily looking to work with the specific deities that right now I tend to work with. So the next deck I have, actually next two decks, are the decks I use to really connect with the idea of the Divine Mother. Especially this time of year, I tend to work with that sort of darker facet of the Great Mother, Divine Mother, however you'd like to see it or not see it. First, I've got the Death Duel Oracle. This is an oracle that really, really this year connected me very closely to that idea of the Dark Goddess or Dark Mother, which is an energy I've really been enjoying working with this winter so far. This oracle kind of goes through different concepts around the idea of death and sort of the mini deaths we can go through throughout our lifetime. And that's what a lot of my work with that Dark Mother energy revolves around, is things coming to an end, new things beginning, those natural cycles we go through, especially again when it comes to those mini deaths we can go through, which I think is such an interesting concept. But that personified deity type energy just comes through loud and clear for me with this deck. This is such a favorite to use. I've only had it since November, but it has really taken such a top spot in my collection. And honestly, the only reason this was not in that top 10 I did was just because I hadn't had it that long. But this one really is such a favorite. I've been using it a ton since I've gotten it, and again, especially to work with that form of personified deity that I like to work with. So that is the Death Duel Oracle. And the tarot I really like to work with either alongside it or on its own, but also to connect with that Great Mother energy, is the Tarot de St. Croix, which is such a gorgeous tarot. And it feels very magical and divine to me in a way that I don't quite know why, but there really is something about these images and the messages in the guidebook. When Lisa de St. Croix, I believe, was making this tarot, she writes about it in the guidebook, but I think she maybe elsewhere I've seen something about it. She did a lot of, I want to say like pilgrimage type journeys maybe, visiting sacred sites to kind of get inspiration behind these paintings, and really channeled a lot of messages from different guides, personified deity that it seemed like she works with. So a lot of that type of energy really does come through this deck for me, even before knowing that that was how she kind of formed this deck. I believe, again, don't quote me on that, but it really does feel almost like imbued with this divine energy, which is really, really cool. But we do get a lot of these quote-unquote darker goddesses in here that really does help me to connect with that sort of dark goddess, dark mother energy that I've been working with lately. And so this has been such a favorite for that. Again, it's almost just indescribable, the feeling I get when I use these decks. It's just, I don't know, it's almost that thing of like when you find one that really connects you to something, it's just such a different kind of message it feels like I get, and this deck totally does that for me, and it's amazing. That is the Tarot de St. Croix. Oh my gosh, my sniffling, I apologize. Now, the last two decks I have are decks that I use to connect with a deity I've been working with for quite some time now, and I see that personified deity as the image, I guess? Persona? I don't know, whatever you want to say. Ellen of the Ways is a deity I work pretty closely with. But the idea behind that is really, to me, sort of being guided through facets from the natural world. And so the deck that really helped me to connect to that personified deity and just that idea in general is the Wildwood Tarot. Now this was just from doing readings with this deck too, not even like the walk in the Wildwood, but I do feel like that walk does kind of connect me to that divine energy as well. which is really, really a cool practice because I feel like I can sort of dedicate that practice to that work I was already doing. And so this one actually has a card that at least I think is Ellen of the Ways. I do think it's supposed to be her. It's the Ancestor card, is the image of Ellen of the Ways. And so I had a lot of really cool experiences with deer and then got this deck and pulled that card. It was just a whole thing. So this is a deck that she really comes through with. And it's one, again, that I can really connect with nature with in this sort of divine feeling way. I do feel like it takes these aspects of nature and how humans kind of interact and historically have interacted with nature. I will say, you know, in a positive way. It's not looking at, you know, the destruction happening anyway. And showing that kind of spiritual exchange happening. That's what it feels like to me anyway. And so that's really what I like to use this deck for, is that kind of path working, connecting with nature in that kind of divine spiritual way. It just really, really works for me. So that is the Wildwood Tarot. And the last deck I have to show is a pretty new one to me, but really just feels like it fits into this category, and that is the Meraki Tarot. This is the 2nd edition. And I don't know. This one just feels magical, but again, magical within the natural world, which is that kind of secondary deity type energy I work with. Not secondary, I shouldn't say, the other one I work with. So we get these very natural landscapes. We get a lot of animal energies in this deck. But I mean, doesn't it? It's all like very magical. So it's not, you know, super realistic all the time. But I just feel like if I were to be able to directly see the outside world in a magical way, this is what it would look like. And so I really just feel like I get messages so easily from that type of divine energy using this deck already. And I just love that we have animals and plants and even crystals in here. It's very, very cool. And I just feel like it ties all of these different magical aspects into one. And so to me, it just innately feels like it's got this sort of divine deity type energy to it that is just, it's very interesting. And again, this is not one I've had for very long at all by any means, but it's just really been working in that way. Let me know if you're interested in seeing a kind of, walkthrough really of this deck, but I can also talk a little bit about my experience so far with it, maybe how I've been using it, things of that sort. Let me know if that would be of any interest, but really have been loving this deck and specifically using it to connect with that personified deity of kind of just walking alongside nature, really, is how I could best describe that. I hope just any of this is making sense. I'm realizing now that this video is heavily like how I see things, so it might not make any sense at all. And that's okay. Maybe it's enjoyable at the very least. So, this is the Meraki Tarot, and that is my last divine deck I have to show you today. So again, as I was saying, I hope this was at least a little bit enjoyable, and on even more of a plus, maybe even made sense. But if you have any decks that you like to do, if you are someone who does divine type connecting, how would you say that? Connecting to any sort of divinity as you see it with your tarot, let me know the things you like to use. I just think it would be fun to like hear about using tarot in a spiritual way, and like if there's specific decks you use, specific ways you use them. I just think it'd be fun. I'm really fascinated by that. But I think that is all I have to share today. So other than that, I hope you all had a fantastic weekend, and I will see you again very soon.